New York City, present day. Sophia Reed's office was perched high above the city, a sanctuary of polished mahogany and glass that reflected the skyline's shimmering towers. It was a place where power and ambition intersected, and Sophia, at just 32, had carved out her own space within its walls. The phone call that would shatter her carefully constructed world came on a brisk Tuesday morning. She was in the middle of a negotiation, her voice calm yet authoritative, when her assistant Jenna knocked softly on the glass door. Sophia caught her eye and frowned. Jenna knew better than to interrupt her during a meeting. With a quick apology to the client on the other end, Sophia pressed the mute button and gestured for Jenna to enter. "What is it?" she asked. Her voice clipped. "There's a call for you," Jenna said, her usual cheeriness replaced by an uncharacteristic seriousness. "It's from a lawyer. He says it's urgent." Sophia's frown deepened, but she nodded, ending the call with her client. "Patch it through," she said, leaning back in her chair as she braced herself for whatever legal matter had found its way to her. "Miss Reed?" The voice on the other end was smooth, practiced. "This is Martin Lowell. I'm calling regarding your father, Henry Reed." Sophia felt her heart skip a beat, the familiar pang of unresolved resentment surfacing. "My father?" she repeated, her tone icy. "We haven't spoken in years. What's this about?" There was a brief pause, as if the man was considering how best to deliver the news. "I'm sorry to inform you that your father passed away last week. The funeral was private, but I've been instructed to contact you regarding his will." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. Despite the years of estrangement, the finality of death was something she hadn't prepared for. "I see," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "What does this have to do with me?" "Your father's will has some unusual stipulations," Lowell continued. "He left the majority of his estate to your sister, Emily Reed." Sophia's grip tightened on the phone. "My sister?" The words tasted foreign in her mouth. Emily was a shadow in her past, a figure she hadn't thought about in over 2 decades. The last memory she had of her was when their mother died, and Emily was sent away to live in a specialized care facility. Sophia was only 10 then, too young to fully understand why her sister had to leave, but old enough to feel the void she left behind. "Yes, your sister," Lowell confirmed. "She's been living in a care facility in upstate New York. Your father arranged for her care, but according to his will, the estate, including a property in Los Angeles, is now in her name. However, there's a condition." "What kind of condition?" Sophia asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. "You must personally meet with Emily and accompany her to Los Angeles to finalize the transfer of the property. It seems your father wanted the two of you to reconnect." Sophia almost laughed at the absurdity of it. After all these years, after the silence and distance, her father's final wish was for a reunion. "And if I refuse?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "If you refuse, the estate will go into a trust, controlled by the state, and Emily will remain in the care facility indefinitely." Sophia closed her eyes, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She didn't want this, didn't want the responsibility, the complications, or the memories it would dredge up. But something in her, perhaps a long-buried sense of duty or curiosity, made her pause. "When do I need to go?" she finally asked, resignation in her tone. "Your father's will states that the sooner, the better," Lowell replied. "I can make the arrangements for you to visit the facility tomorrow." Sophia nodded, though the lawyer couldn't see her. "Fine. Send me the details." As she hung up the phone, Sophia stared out the window at the bustling city below, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. The office, once a symbol of her success and independence, now felt suffocating. Her father was gone, and with him, the chance to ever resolve the rift between them. And now, out of nowhere, Emily was back in her life, a sister she barely knew, yet who held the key to her father's final wish. Sophia sighed, running a hand through her meticulously styled hair. She was a woman who thrived on control, on knowing the next step before she took it. But this was something she couldn't have planned for. Tomorrow she would meet Emily. Tomorrow she would face the past she had spent so long trying to forget. But tonight she would work late, as she always did, trying to ignore the unease gnawing at the edges of her carefully ordered world. The air in the care facility was sterile, the kind of artificial cleanliness that did nothing to mask the underlying scent of disinfectant and age. Sophia stood in the hallway, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the strap of her leather handbag. The day outside was bright, the kind of crisp autumn morning that made the city's concrete feel a little softer. But inside, everything felt muted, as if the walls themselves absorbed all the light and sound. Sophia had been here before, but that was years ago. She remembered the last visit vividly, her father's hurried explanations, the clinical voices of doctors discussing Emily's condition, and the overwhelming sense of confusion and fear. Now, standing at the threshold of the past, she couldn't help but feel the same sense of dread creeping back into her chest. The door to the common room opened, and a middle-aged nurse with kind eyes stepped out. "Miss Reed, Emily is ready to see you now." Sophia nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat as she followed the nurse inside. The room was spacious, with large windows letting in the morning light. A few residents were scattered around, some watching TV, others engaged in various activities. And then, in a corner by the window, sat Emily. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. Emily looked almost the same as she remembered. Her long, sandy hair pulled back into a loose braid, her pale blue eyes fixated on a puzzle spread out on the table before her. She was dressed simply, in a light sweater and jeans, her fingers moving with swift precision as she fit pieces together with a concentration that blocked out the rest of the world. "Emily," the nurse said gently, walking over to her, "your sister is here to see you." Emily's hands paused, and she looked up, her gaze locking onto Sophia. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The years of separation, of lives lived apart, seemed to stretch out between them like a vast chasm. Sophia felt a rush of emotions, guilt, nostalgia, and an unfamiliar sense of protectiveness. "Hi, Emily," Sophia managed, her voice softer than she intended. Emily blinked, her expression unreadable, but she nodded slightly. "Hello, Sophia," she replied, her voice calm and measured, as if greeting a stranger. Sophia took a seat across from her, unsure of what to say. The nurse excused herself, leaving the sisters alone. For a while, the only sound was the faint clicking of puzzle pieces as Emily continued her task, seemingly unaffected by Sophia's presence. I came to see you because of Dad's will," Sophia began, trying to find the right words. "He left something important for us, but we need to go to Los Angeles to get it." Emily looked up again, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Los Angeles?" "Yes, it's a house. He left it to you, but we have to go together to claim it." Sophia hesitated, watching for any sign of reaction. "Would you like that, Emily? A road trip, just the two of us?" Emily's fingers stilled on the puzzle, and she tilted her head as if processing the information. "Dad wanted us to go together?" Sophia nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. "Yes, he wanted us to reconnect." For a long moment, Emily said nothing, her gaze shifting back to the puzzle. Just as Sophia was about to speak again, Emily nodded slowly. Okay, she said quietly, almost to herself. We can go together. Relief washed over Sophia, though it was tinged with uncertainty. She hadn't expected Emily to agree so easily, and now that she had, the reality of what lay ahead began to sink in. This wasn't just a simple trip. It was a journey that would force them both to confront the past, and, for Sophia, the future. The next morning, they set off in Sophia's sleek black SUV, the city's skyscrapers, gradually giving way to open highways and sprawling countryside. The silence in the car was heavy, punctuated only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of paper as Emily fidgeted with a map she had insisted on bringing. Sophia glanced over at her sister, who was staring intently at the map, tracing the route with her finger. "Do you like maps, Emily?" Sophia asked, trying to break the silence. Emily nodded without looking up. "I like knowing where I'm going. The roads are like puzzles." Sophia smiled faintly. "I guess they are." The first few hours passed in relative quiet, with Emily absorbed in her map and Sophia focused on the road. But as they left New York behind and the landscape began to change, so did Emily's behavior. She began to hum softly, a repetitive tune that seemed to calm her. Occasionally, she would mutter numbers under her breath, or suddenly ask Sophia to slow down or speed up, depending on the traffic patterns. At first, Sophia found it frustrating. Emily's requests seemed random and unnecessary, and the constant humming grated on her nerves. But as the miles rolled by, she began to notice something. Emily's suggestions, though seemingly odd, often avoided traffic jams or led them to more scenic routes. It was as if Emily had an innate sense of the road, a genius for navigation that Sophia hadn't anticipated. By the time they stopped for lunch at a small diner in Pennsylvania, Sophia's frustration had softened into curiosity. As they sat down in a booth by the window, she watched Emily carefully fold her map, placing it on the table with precision. "You're really good at this," Sophia said, unable to hide her admiration. "You knew exactly when to avoid the traffic. How did you do that?" Emily looked up, her expression neutral. "I can see the patterns, the way the cars move, the timing of the lights. It's like the puzzle pieces fitting together." Sophia nodded, trying to understand. "So you see things differently?" "Yes," Emily replied simply, as if that explained everything. Sophia leaned back in her seat, her mind racing. She had always known Emily was different, special in ways she couldn't fully grasp. But now, seeing her sister's abilities firsthand, she realized just how much she had underestimated her. There was so much more to Emily than the quiet, distant girl she remembered. As they resumed their journey, Sophia found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the road trip. Emily's quirks, which had initially frustrated her, began to feel like part of the journey's unique charm. They stopped at a few small towns along the way, and while Emily's behavior often drew curious stares, Sophia found herself defending her sister with a fierceness she hadn't expected. By the time they reached Ohio, the dynamic between them had shifted. Sophia still struggled to understand Emily's world, but she was starting to see the beauty in it, the way Emily found order in chaos, how she saw patterns where others saw randomness. It was as if Emily's mind was a kaleidoscope, constantly shifting and rearranging the world into something new. As they drove into the setting sun, the horizon glowing with the promise of what lay ahead, Sophia couldn't help but wonder what other surprises Emily had in store for her. The road was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it, together. The road stretched out before them, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the endless expanse of the American heartland. As they left the bustling cities behind, the landscape began to shift, becoming a patchwork of rolling hills, open fields, and quaint small towns. It was a part of the country Sophia had rarely seen, her life in New York having kept her tethered to the urban sprawl. Now she found herself in a world that was both foreign and strangely comforting. Their first major stop was in a small town in Indiana, a place that seemed plucked straight from a postcard with its red brick buildings and tree-lined streets. They pulled into a gas station on the outskirts, the kind with a single pump and a small convenience store attached. Sophia parked the car and stretched, the long hours on the road leaving her stiff and weary. "Let's grab some snacks," she suggested, glancing at Emily, who was already absorbed in a new puzzle book she had picked up along the way. Emily nodded, but as they walked toward the store, she paused, her gaze fixed on the old-fashioned vending machine outside. "Gumballs," she said, almost to herself. Sophia followed her gaze and smiled. "You want one?" Emily nodded again, more emphatically this time. Sophia dug into her pocket for some change and handed it to Emily, watching as she carefully selected a bright red gumball. As Emily chewed, a small smile played on her lips, and for a moment, Sophia saw a glimpse of the childlike joy she must have felt the last time she had one. Inside the store, Sophia busied herself picking out snacks and drinks, while Emily wandered the aisles, her fingers brushing lightly over the items on the shelves. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with a friendly smile, watched them with polite curiosity. "Passing through?" she asked, as Sophia approached the counter. "Yeah, heading to Los Angeles," Sophia replied, placing the items on the counter. The woman nodded. "Long drive. You and your sister?" Sophia hesitated for a moment. "Yes, my sister." The woman glanced over at Emily, who was now studying a row of candy bars with intense concentration. "She seems special." Sophia bristled at the word, but she forced a smile. "She is." The clerk smiled back, a knowing look in her eyes. "You take care of her. That kind of bond is rare." Sophia nodded, paying for the snacks and leading Emily back outside. As they got into the car, she couldn't shake the clerk's words. The bond between them, was it really there? Or was it something she was only beginning to understand? The first real challenge came just outside of St. Louis. They were driving along a scenic route when the car began to sputter, the engine making a strange chugging noise that sent a wave of panic through Sophia. She glanced at the dashboard, where a warning light had flickered on. "Damn it," she muttered, pulling over to the side of the road. Emily, who had been humming softly to herself, looked up, her brow furrowed. "What's wrong?" "I think something's wrong with the engine," Sophia replied, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. "I need to call for help." As Sophia stepped out of the car to check under the hood, Emily followed, standing a few feet away as if uncertain of what to do. The afternoon sun beat down on them, the heat adding to Sophia's growing irritation. She tried the number for roadside assistance, but the signal was weak, and the call kept dropping. "Great, just great," Sophia muttered, kicking at the gravel. Emily watched her for a moment, then walked over to the front of the car. She leaned in, peering at the engine with an intensity that caught Sophia off guard. "Alternator," Emily said suddenly, pointing to a part of the engine. "What?" Sophia asked, frowning. "It's the alternator. It's not charging the battery properly," Emily explained, her voice calm and certain. Sophia blinked, surprised by the diagnosis. "How do you know that?" Emily shrugged, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I read about it. When the car started making that noise, I remembered reading about it in one of Dad's car manuals." Sophia stared at her, a mix of disbelief and admiration washing over her. She had no idea Emily had such knowledge, let alone the ability to recall it so effortlessly. "Okay, so what do we do?" "We need to find a mechanic," Emily replied, her eyes scanning the road ahead. "There should be a town nearby." Sophia hesitated for a moment, then nodded, trusting Emily's instincts. They managed to start the car again, and after a few miles of cautious driving, they found a small auto repair shop in a dusty one-stoplight town. The mechanic confirmed Emily's diagnosis and got to work on fixing the problem, though it would take a couple of hours. While they waited, Sophia and Emily wandered around the town, which seemed frozen in time. They found a small park with a few benches and a playground that had seen better days. Emily gravitated toward the swings, sitting down on one and gently rocking back and forth. Sophia sat on the bench, watching her sister. "You're really smart, you know that?" Emily looked over at her, a hint of a smile on her lips. "Dad used to say that. He said my brain was like a library with lots of books." Sophia felt a pang of emotion at the mention of their father. "I never knew how much you remembered. It's incredible." Emily shrugged again, her attention drifting back to the swings. "It's just how my brain works." Sophia sat in silence, absorbing Emily's words. There was so much she didn't know about her sister, so much she had missed out on. The realization was both humbling and heartbreaking. As they resumed their journey later that day, Sophia found herself paying closer attention to Emily, noticing the little things she did, the way she organized the snacks in the car, how she tapped her fingers in a rhythmic pattern whenever she was deep in thought, the way she could recall details from their childhood that Sophia had long forgotten. One evening, as they drove through the rolling hills of Missouri, Emily began to recite the names of the stars she could see through the car window. Her voice was soft, almost melodic, as she listed them off with the precision of an astronomer. Sophia listened in awe, realizing that Emily's mind was a vast, untapped well of knowledge and memory. "Did Dad teach you all this?" Sophia asked, her voice tinged with wonder. Emily nodded. "He taught me a lot. We used to look at the stars together. He said they were like pieces of a puzzle, and if you knew how to look, you could see the patterns." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. She had always thought of her father as distant, even cold, but hearing this, she realized there was a side of him she had never known, one that had been reserved for Emily. As they crossed into Kansas, the vast plains stretching out endlessly before them, Sophia's thoughts turned inward. The journey had become more than just a means to an end. It was a revelation, each mile peeling back the layers of her past and her relationship with her sister. Emily wasn't just someone to take care of. She was someone to learn from, to understand, and to connect with. That night, they stayed in a small motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon lights and a slightly musty smell. As they settled into their room, Sophia found herself staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. "Emily," she whispered, turning to look at her sister, who was lying in the bed next to hers. "Yes? Do you ever wish things had been different, that we had grown up together?" There was a long pause, and for a moment, Sophia thought Emily had fallen asleep, but then she heard her sister's voice, soft and steady. "Sometimes. But Dad said that things happen for a reason, that we had to take different paths to find our way back to each other." Sophia felt a tear slip down her cheek, the weight of her father's choices and her own regrets pressing down on her. "I'm glad we're together now," she whispered. "Me too," Emily replied, her voice warm and sincere. As the sounds of the highway hummed softly in the background, Sophia felt a sense of peace settle over her. The challenges they had faced on this journey, the misunderstandings and frustrations, had brought them closer in ways she hadn't expected. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be, by her sister's side on the road to somewhere new. The desert sky had turned an ominous shade of gray by the time they crossed into Arizona. What had started as a few scattered clouds quickly escalated into a full-blown storm, the kind that seemed to come out of nowhere in the vast, open spaces of the Southwest. The wind whipped across the highway, and rain began to pelt the windshield in thick, heavy drops that blurred the road ahead. Sophia gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white as she squinted through the downpour. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the deluge, and she could barely see the faint outline of the road. Emily sat silently in the passenger seat, her fingers tapping out a nervous rhythm on her leg. "We need to find a place to stop," Sophia said, her voice tense. "I can't drive in this." Emily didn't respond, her eyes wide as she stared out the window, the storm reflecting in her gaze. Sophia's frustration, already simmering after a long day of driving, began to boil over. "Emily, are you listening? We need to stop." Sophia's voice was sharper than she intended, and she immediately regretted it. Emily flinched at the harsh tone, but nodded quickly. "Yes, there's a sign up ahead, motel." Sophia nodded, her eyes straining to spot the sign through the rain. Sure enough, a dimly lit sign appeared on the side of the road, pointing toward a small, run-down motel nestled in a cluster of scrubby trees. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being stranded in the storm. She turned off the highway onto the gravel drive, the car's tires crunching over the wet stones. The motel looked as if it had seen better days, with its peeling paint and flickering neon vacancy sign. But at that moment, Sophia didn't care. All she wanted was to get out of the storm and rest. They parked under the overhang near the entrance, and Sophia hurried inside to check in while Emily waited in the car. The motel's lobby was small and dimly lit, with faded floral wallpaper and a creaky ceiling fan that did little to dispel the humid air. The man behind the counter was a portly, middle-aged man with a weary expression, as if he had seen one too many travelers like them pass through. "Room for two?" he asked, barely looking up from the old-fashioned ledger he was scribbling in. "Yes, please," Sophia replied, pulling out her wallet. "Storm's a bad one," the man remarked, as he handed her the key. "You'll be safe here, though. Room's around back, second door on the right." "Thanks," Sophia muttered, taking the key and heading back to the car. Emily was staring down at her lap when Sophia opened the door. "We've got a room," Sophia said, trying to keep her tone neutral. "Let's go." They grabbed their bags and made a dash through the rain to the room, the wind howling around them as they fumbled with the key. The room itself was basic: a double bed, a small dresser, and an ancient TV that looked like it hadn't worked in years. The walls were a dingy beige, and the carpet was worn thin in places, but at least it was dry. Sophia dropped her bag on the bed and sighed, running a hand through her damp hair. The exhaustion of the past few days had caught up with her, and the stress of the storm had pushed her to the edge. She could feel the tension radiating through her body, a tight knot in her chest that refused to loosen. Emily, meanwhile, was standing in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself as she swayed slightly, a sign that she was overwhelmed. Sophia knew that look, but in her current state, she didn't have the patience to deal with it. "Emily, please, just sit down," Sophia snapped, her voice cracking with frustration. Emily hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape. I don't like storms, she whispered, her voice trembling. We're inside now. We're safe, Sophia said, trying to keep her voice calm. But the strain was evident. Emily didn't move, her anxiety growing more palpable by the second. I don't like it here, she murmured, her voice barely audible. That was the breaking point. Sophia's patience, already stretched thin, snapped. Emily, I'm doing the best I can, she shouted, her voice echoing in the small room. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be dragged across the country in a storm, dealing with your issues. I'm exhausted, and I can't take it anymore. The words hung in the air, sharp and painful, and the moment they left her mouth, Sophia regretted them. But it was too late. Emily's face crumpled, her eyes filling with tears as she recoiled from Sophia's outburst. I'm sorry, Emily whispered, her voice shaking. I'm sorry. And then, like a switch flipping, Emily retreated into herself, her expression going blank as she shut down. She curled up on the bed, her back to Sophia, and buried her face in the pillow, her body trembling with silent sobs. Sophia stood there, her heart pounding, as the realization of what she had just done hit her like a punch to the gut. She had lashed out at Emily, blamed her for things that weren't her fault, for emotions Sophia herself couldn't control. She had let her exhaustion and frustration spill over, and now Emily was paying the price. Emily, I'm so sorry, Sophia whispered, but Emily didn't respond. She was lost in her own world now, a place Sophia couldn't reach. Feeling utterly defeated, Sophia sat down on the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. How had it come to this? All she had wanted was to fulfill her father's wishes, to make it through this journey and get back to her life. But now, all she could see was the damage she had caused, the pain she had inflicted on the one person who needed her most. The storm raged outside, the wind howling and rain lashing against the windows. The room felt like a prison, closing in on her with every passing second. Desperate for some air, Sophia stood up and went to the small dresser to unpack. As she pulled out Emily's belongings, her hand brushed against something tucked inside one of the pockets. A small, folded piece of paper, worn and yellowed with age. Curious, Sophia unfolded the paper and saw that it was a letter written in her father's familiar handwriting. The sight of his words, so carefully penned, made her heart ache. My dearest Sophia, if you are reading this, then I am no longer with you. There is so much I wish I could have said to you in life, but I fear I never found the right words. I know I failed you in many ways, and for that I am deeply sorry. Emily is a special soul, and I know you understand that. I sent her away, not because I didn't love her, but because I was afraid I couldn't give her the care she needed. But in doing so, I broke our family, and that is a burden I will carry forever. I believe with all my heart that you are the only one who can truly take care of Emily now. You have a strength and compassion that I have always admired, even if I didn't show it. I ask you to forgive me, Sophia, and to give Emily the love and understanding she deserves. She needs you more than you may realize. With all my love, Dad. Sophia's hands trembled as she read the letter, tears blurring the words on the page. Her father's confession, his plea for forgiveness, cut through her like a knife. All these years, she had carried the weight of their estrangement, believing that he had abandoned her and Emily. But now, in this simple letter, she saw the truth. He had loved them both in his own flawed way, and he had trusted her with the most important responsibility of all. Emily needed her. That much was clear now, more than ever. But it wasn't just Emily who needed healing. Sophia did too. She had spent so long building walls around her heart, closing herself off from the pain of the past, that she had forgotten what it meant to truly connect with someone, to be vulnerable to love. Sophia folded the letter carefully and placed it back in Emily's bag. Then, with a deep breath, she walked over to the bed and gently touched her sister's shoulder. "Emily," she whispered, her voice soft and filled with remorse. "I'm so sorry for what I said. I didn't mean it. I'm scared and I'm tired, but that's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." Emily didn't move at first, but then she slowly turned to face Sophia, her tear-streaked face breaking Sophia's heart all over again. "I'm sorry," Emily repeated, her voice so small, so vulnerable. Sophia shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, you have nothing to be sorry for. I'm the one who needs to apologize. I've been so wrapped up in my own feelings that I didn't see how much you've been trying, how strong you are. Dad was right. I need to be better, for both of us." Emily looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to process Sophia's words. Then, slowly, she sat up and reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched Sophia's cheek. "Are we okay?" Emily asked, her voice tentative. Sophia nodded, covering Emily's hand with her own. "Yes, we're okay. We're going to be okay, Emily, I promise." For the first time since the storm began, Sophia felt a sense of calm wash over her. The road ahead would still be difficult, but now she knew she wasn't alone. They would face whatever challenges came their way together. The Pacific Ocean stretched out before them, a vast expanse of shimmering blue meeting the sky at the horizon. The air was warm, tinged with the salty scent of the sea, and the gentle sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the silence. After days on the road, Los Angeles had finally come into view, its sprawling cityscape giving way to the serene beauty of the coastline. Sophia guided the car down the winding road that led to the house, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. Emily sat quietly beside her, her gaze fixed on the scenery outside, her expression one of quiet curiosity. When the house came into view, both sisters fell silent. It was modest, as the lawyer had described, a single-story, mid-century home with large windows that framed the ocean beyond. The exterior was painted a soft, weathered blue, and the front yard was dotted with wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze. It wasn't grand or ostentatious, but there was something undeniably inviting about it, as if it had been waiting for them all this time. Sophia parked the car and took a deep breath, glancing at Emily. "This is it," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "Our new home." Emily nodded slowly, her eyes wide as she took in every detail. "It's beautiful." They stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under their feet as they made their way to the front door. Sophia fumbled with the key, her hands trembling slightly, before finally unlocking it. The door creaked open, revealing the interior of the house, a space that felt both familiar and new, as if it had been part of their lives all along. The living room was bright and airy, with large windows that flooded the space with natural light. The furniture was simple but comfortable, and the walls were adorned with framed photographs of the ocean and distant horizons. A well-worn bookshelf stood in one corner, filled with an eclectic mix of books, some old, some new, all of them seemingly chosen with care. Sophia and Emily wandered through the house in silence, taking in each room as if they were discovering pieces of a puzzle. The kitchen, with its retro appliances and cozy breakfast nook. The bedrooms, each with its own view of the ocean. And finally, the back porch, which opened up to a small garden that overlooked the cliffs, where the waves crashed far below. Sophia stepped out onto the porch, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the view. The sun was beginning to set, casting the sky in hues of pink and orange, the colors reflecting off the water in a dazzling display. It was a sight that felt like a reward after everything they had been through, a promise of peace and renewal. Emily joined her on the porch, her expression softening as she gazed out at the horizon. "Dad used to talk about this place," she said quietly, her voice carrying a note of reverence. "He said it was his favorite spot in the world, a place where he could think and just be." Sophia nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I can see why. It's perfect." They stood there for a long time, side by side, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. Sophia's mind raced with everything that had happened, everything she had learned about herself, about Emily, and about the father she thought she had known. The journey had changed her in ways she hadn't expected, breaking down the walls she had built around her heart and showing her the true meaning of family. For so long, Sophia had defined herself by her career, by her success in the corporate world. But standing here in this place that her father had loved so much, she realized that those things didn't matter as much as she had thought. What mattered was the connection she had with Emily, the bond that had grown stronger with each mile they traveled together. "I'm not going back to New York," Sophia said suddenly, the decision crystallizing in her mind as the words left her mouth. Emily turned to her, surprise flickering in her eyes. "You're not?" Sophia shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "No, this is where I need to be, with you." She paused, her voice softening. "If you'll have me." Emily's expression shifted, a mixture of relief and joy washing over her. "I'd like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'd like that a lot." Sophia felt a wave of emotion rise within her, but this time it wasn't fear or frustration. It was love. Pure, unfiltered love for her sister, for the life they could build together, and for the chance to start anew. "I'll take care of you, Emily," Sophia said, reaching out to take her sister's hand. "We'll take care of each other." Emily nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Yes, together. As the sun sank below the horizon, the last rays of light casting a golden glow over the ocean, the sisters sat down on the porch steps, their shoulders touching as they watched the sky turn to dusk. The world felt quiet and still, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. For the first time in years, Sophia felt at peace. The road they had traveled had been long and difficult, but it had led them here, to this place of serenity and understanding. And now, as they looked out at the endless ocean, the future stretched out before them like the open sea, vast, full of possibilities, and theirs to navigate together. The journey wasn't over, but the destination was clear. And as they sat there, side by side, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the twilight sky, Sophia knew that they had found something far more valuable than any inheritance, each other. The sun had set, but a new day was already beginning, and with it, a new chapter in their lives, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a future built on the strength of the bond they had rediscovered. A future they would face together, hand in hand, as sisters.